Rhiannon denied me before her pack. She did it in 11 words, in front of 300 people, under the chandeliers of the Ashgrove Great Hall, with the wolf crest banners hanging still in the windless heat of the room. And she did it without raising her voice, because Rhiannon Duskwood never raised her voice for anything, not even the thing that mattered most. Someone had asked her lightly, the way you ask a question you already think you know the answer to, what her secretary was to her. Rhiannon turned the signet ring on her right hand once with her thumb, the tell I had spent 3 years learning and never once told her I'd learned. And she said, "She's my secretary, nothing more." I was 26.
Hi everyone! Thank you for staying with me. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Stay close, stay connected.
I had worked inside that woman's private study for 3 years, kept her letters in her calendar, and the one key besides her own that opened the locked drawer of her desk. And I had let myself believe, for exactly 19 days, that something between us had changed. It had not changed. Or it had changed and she had decided in front of everyone that it would change back. I want to tell you about the ring and the 11 words and the drawer where I had already hidden something she was going to find. But I have to back up first, because none of it makes sense without the night with the torn hand, 3 weeks before the gala, when I still believed I understood the woman I worked for. Before I go on, if this story pulls you in, I keep the longer, more uncensored chapters of stories like this on my Patreon, GL After Hours. It's linked in the description and the comments for whenever you want to stay a little longer inside the story. Let me back up. My name is Isolde Farrow. I was an Omega, 26 years old, and for 3 years I had been the personal secretary to Rhiannon Duskwood, the Alpha of Ashgrove, a moorland pack territory in the cold north, held against a border claim from the neighboring Harrow pack that had never quite gone away, only gone quiet, the way old wars do when neither side has the strength to finish them. I came to Ashgrove the way most people who end up somewhere permanent come to it, sideways, out of necessity, with no intention of staying. My mother had been a seamstress in a market town 2 days south, and when she died, I had exactly one useful skill, a tidy hand and a head for figures, and exactly one letter of introduction, written by a schoolteacher who had once mended a dispute with the Ashgrove household over a shipment of wool. I arrived in a borrowed coat with everything I owned in a single case, expecting to be turned away within the week, and instead, I was shown into a cold, book-lined study on the 2nd floor of the manor, and left alone with the previous secretary's unfinished ledgers for 3 hours, while the new Alpha, barely a year into the position herself, still learning the weight of her mother's old chair, decided what to do with me. She came in at dusk. I remember it exactly, the particular gray light through the north window, because it is the first time I cataloged anything about her without meaning to. She did not introduce herself first. She read my work first, standing at my shoulder in total silence for what felt like an hour and was probably 4 minutes, and then she said, "Your figures are correct, and your hand is legible. Most people manage one or the other." And that was the whole of my interview. And that was the day I became Rhiannon Duskwood's secretary. I kept her correspondence. I kept her calendar. I was the only person in the household besides Rhiannon herself who carried a key to the private study on the 2nd floor of the manor. And I want you to understand what that meant before I tell you what I did with it, because the key is where all of this starts. Rhiannon was 34. She had inherited Ashgrove from her mother at 26. My age now, which is a detail I did not let myself sit with until much later. And she had spent every year since holding a territory that a weaker Alpha would have lost twice over. She was tall, and she moved with an economy that I cataloged without meaning to. The way you catalog a person you are trying very hard not to love. Platinum blonde hair worn sleek in a low knot most days, sometimes a single braid when she rode the border. Ice blue eyes that gave away nothing, unless you had spent 3 years learning the one thing they did give away, which was the ring. She wore the Ashgrove signet on her right hand, and when she was about to say something that would cost her, a hard decision, a refusal, a truth she didn't want to say, she turned it once with her thumb before she spoke. I don't think she knew she did it, I know she never told me she did it. I simply watched her long enough, across 3 years of quiet mornings and long correspondence, and the particular silence of a woman who never raised her voice, to learn it the way you learn weather. She smelled like cedar and wood smoke. That is not a decorative detail. It is the reason I knew, before I understood anything else about what was happening to me, that the woman who had been in my rooms 3 weeks before the gala was never going to leave the inside of me quietly. I should tell you about the walk on the moor, because it's the reason I keep a sprig of heather pressed flat inside the back cover of my ledger, and because it's the first time I let myself think the word mine about a woman who could never, structurally, belong to a secretary. It was early spring, over a year before any of this, and Rhiannon had asked me, not ordered, asked, which she almost never did, to walk the northern boundary with her while she checked the old stone markers the harrow pack liked to test in the thaw. We didn't speak for the first hour. The wind came off the moor in long cold sheets, and I remember thinking that I had never once, in 2 years of service, seen her outside the study, seen the way her shoulders dropped half an inch when there was no one to hold them square for. Then she picked a stem of heather out of the wind-flattened grass, considered it the way she considered everything, and handed it to me without a word. And I have never been able to explain to another living person why that felled me more completely than any declaration would have. I kept it. I still have it. It is the first entry in a catalog I did not know I was building. I want to tell you about the handwriting too, because I spent 3 years transcribing it, filing it, learning its particular slant. Tight, economical, the same discipline as her body. There is a version of this story where that handwriting is simply paperwork, and there is the true version, which is that I had memorized the shape of her R the way other women memorize a voice, and I could pick a single line of hers out of a stack of 100 letters without reading a word of it, just from the angle of the downstroke. None of this, the heather, the handwriting, the ring, was supposed to become anything. I was a secretary. She was the alpha of a territory under siege. There is a hierarchy in a pack the way there is a hierarchy in any house with a locked room in it. And I had made my peace, or told myself I had, with being the person who kept the room and never lived in it. I want to say one thing before I go further, because I think it matters to how you understand what I did later. I was not an unhappy woman. I had a life at Ashgrove, whisked comb, 20 years old, a junior clerk in the household who had attached herself to me within a week of her own arrival and never let go. Marta Quinlan, the pack physician, who terrified new staff and adored the ones who stayed. My own small room with its own small window. Not facing the moor, but facing something. I had built an entire architecture of contentment around the idea that some doors simply did not open for people like me. And I had gotten good, very good, at not standing in front of them and wanting. There were small rituals to that contentment, and I think I should tell you about them now, because they are the things that later made the silence between us so unbearable. I had a chipped inkwell, blue glass, cracked along one side from a fall in my first month at Ashgrove, that I refused to replace out of some stubbornness I never examined too closely. It was mine. It had survived, and I liked things that survived. And there was the matter of my name. In front of the household, in front of council members and visiting allies, Rhiannon called me Miss Farrow, correct and distant, the way an alpha addresses staff. But in the study, door closed, correspondence between us, she called me Isolde, had done since my second year without ceremony, simply one day using it instead of the other. And I had never told her what it did to me. Hearing my own name said like that, low, unhurried, as though it belonged to her as much as to me. It was a small thing. It was, for 3 years, the largest thing in my life that I never spoke aloud. Then, 3 weeks before the gala, she came back from the border with her hand torn open on old wire the Harrow Scouts had strung along the thaw line, and everyone else in the house was asleep, and I was the one who found her bleeding quietly into a dish towel in the kitchen, because she had not wanted to wake anyone for something she considered beneath waking anyone for. "You should have called for Marta," I said. "Marta is asleep," she said, as though that settled it, as though the correct response to injury was simply to wait it out in a dark kitchen until morning. I bandaged it myself. In the study, because that was where the medical kit was kept, under the north-facing window that looks out over the whole dark moor, and her hand was warm in mine. And for the first time in 3 years, I was touching her without a letter or a ledger between us. She let me. She did not turn the ring, not once, the entire time. And I understand now that this was its own kind of tell, the absence of the gesture meaning as much as its presence ever had. I remember the particular quiet of that room at that hour, the way the lamp made a small gold country of just the desk and just our two hands, and how she watched my face while I worked instead of watching the wound, which no one had ever done to me before, in 3 years, not once. "You're careful," she said. "You've always been careful. I've watched you be careful with everyone in this house for 3 years. It's my work to be careful," I said. "It isn't, tonight," she said. And that was the sentence that undid me, because it was the first time in 3 years she had drawn a line between the woman who kept her ledgers and the woman standing in front of her at midnight, with her sleeves pushed up. I am not going to describe what happened after the bandage in the kind of detail this platform doesn't allow, and I would not, even if it did, because that night belongs to the two of us and not to an audience. I will tell you only that it happened once, that neither of us spoke of it again in the 3 weeks that followed, and that I went back to filing her correspondence the next morning as though my hands had not memorized the exact shape of her shoulders in the dark. I told myself it was a single night. I told myself a woman like Rhiannon Duskwood did not make room in her life for a second one. Not with the Harrow border still unsettled. Not with a council that had been pressing her for a year to secure the North the old way. The way packs have always secured borders, with a marriage. 4 days after the bandage, Elder Adeline Fenn came to the study with the proposal already drafted. Alpha Cressida Marrow of Thornfield Pack, whose territory bordered Harrow on the far side, and whose alliance would put Ashgrove inside a wall of allied land 3 packs deep. Fenn was not a cruel woman. I want to be fair to her, even now, even knowing what came later. She had sat on the Ashgrove Council since before Rhiannon's mother died, had buried 2 of her own children to a Harrow raid decades back, and had spent every year since convinced, with the particular conviction of grief that has calcified into policy, that the only thing standing between Ashgrove and a repeat of that loss was land, allies, and paper. She did not know about the bandage. She did not know about the moor or the heather, or any of the small architecture Rhiannon and I had built without meaning to. She only knew that the border was unsettled, and that her Alpha had one uncommitted asset left to spend, and she spent it exactly the way 30 years of grief had taught her to. Rhiannon read the proposal standing at the window, the one that looks over the moor, and she did not say no. She turned the ring once. She said she would consider it. I filed the proposal myself, in my own tight hand, in the drawer that only 2 keys opened, and I told myself that considering was not the same as choosing, and I let 19 days go by believing that. Why did I let myself believe it? I have asked myself that question more times than I can count. I think the true answer is that hope is not a decision you make once. It is a decision you make every morning quietly, without telling anyone. And I made it 19 mornings in a row before the gala took it away from me in 11 words. The gala was the annual founding feast, the night Ashgrove marks the anniversary of the Pack's charter with the whole household and half the Northern Territories in the Great Hall, the wolf crest banners brought down from storage, the long tables, the string trio Rhiannon's mother had insisted on every year since before I was born, and no one had had the will to discontinue. I had planned quietly to spend it in the coat room. It is what I had done the 2 galas before, and it had suited me. I was the secretary, not a guest, and there is a comfort in a role you understand the edges of. My friend Whist Combe would not let me. Whist was 20, a junior clerk in the household, the only person in Ashgrove who knew, not everything but enough. And she came to my rooms an hour before the gala, with a green wool dress over her arm that had belonged to my mother. "You've spent 3 weeks walking around this house like a woman who swallowed a secret hole," she said, holding the dress up against the last of the daylight. I don't know exactly what happened between you and the alpha, and I'm not going to ask, because you get a particular look when I try. But I do know you're not spending tonight folding coats. It's easier in the coat room, I said. Easier isn't the same as better, Whist said, which was, for a 20-year-old, an unreasonably wise thing to say. And she said it while she was already unpinning my hair, so I understood the conversation was finished before it had properly started. I wore the dress. I want that on the record, because everything that happened next happened because I let myself, for one evening, want something instead of managing it. The hall was full by the time I came down. 300 pack members and allies, the chandeliers lit, the string trio playing something old and slow, Elder Fen holding court near the dais with Alpha Cressida Marrow of Thornfield at her side, already introduced to half the room as though the ink on the proposal were dry. Cressida was 31, composed, watchful in a way I recognized because I did the same thing for a living. She was reading the room the way I read Rhiannon's correspondence, for what wasn't being said. She did not look unkind. That somehow made it worse. Rhiannon found me near the second hearth within 20 minutes. She did not say anything about the dress. She looked at me the way she looked at the moor from the study window, long, unhurried, cataloging. And she said quietly, under the noise of the trio, "You look like the moor in spring," which was from a woman who had once handed me a stem of heather and called it nothing, the closest thing to a declaration I had ever heard her make in public. "That's a strange thing to say to your secretary," I said, because I did not know what else to do with the way my chest had gone tight. "I'm aware," she said, and there was something almost like a smile at the corner of her mouth, and she touched, briefly, so briefly I might have imagined it if I hadn't spent 3 years cataloging exactly this kind of thing, the back of my hand with 2 fingers under the edge of the table where no one could see. She drew me toward the terrace doors a few minutes later, away from the worst of the noise, and for perhaps 3 minutes we stood at the edge of the great hall with the cold night air coming through the open door and the chandeliers behind us, and neither of us said anything at all, and I let myself believe, standing there, that whatever the council wanted from her, whatever Cressida Marrow's presence in the room meant, there was a version of this night where the two of us simply kept standing at that door until the party ended without us. For 1 full minute, standing in the noise and the candlelight, I let myself believe the whole architecture of my caution had been unnecessary. Then Elder Fen found us. She did not mean any harm by it. I understand that now, though I did not understand it then. She was simply doing what a council elder does at a founding feast, drawing her alpha back into the room to make the introductions the evening required. She brought Cressida over, and a woman I did not know, one of the northern allies, emboldened by wine and the particular curiosity a gala grants people, looked between Rhiannon and me and asked lightly, gesturing with her glass, what exactly I was to the alpha. She meant nothing cruel by it. I understand that now. She was making conversation the way you make conversation at a party, filling a silence with the nearest available question. I do not think she noticed, in the half-second before Rhiannon answered, that Cressida Marrow had gone very still, or that Elder Fen's eyes had moved once, sharply, from me to the terrace doors we had just come through. Rhiannon turned the ring once with her thumb. I saw it happen. I had spent 3 years learning that gesture, and I watched it happen in real time. The half-second where she decided what the true cost of the true answer would be, with Elder Fen at her shoulder, and Cressida Marrow watching, and the border with Harrow sitting unresolved under everyone's feet, and I watched her choose the pack over the study, the alliance over the heather, the treaty over the torn hand I had bandaged 3 weeks before. "She's my secretary," Rhiannon said. Nothing more. 11 words. She did not raise her voice. She never raised her voice. The string trio kept playing. Cressida Marrow, to her credit, did not smile, did not gloat, only looked away with the particular tact of a woman who understood exactly what she had just watched and had the grace not to enjoy it. Elder Fen nodded, satisfied, already moving the conversation toward the treaty terms, and I stood there in my mother's green dress with 300 people around me, and understood completely that I had spent 3 minutes on a terrace building a house on ground that had just been sold out from under me in 11 words. I did not cry in the hall. I want you to know that, because I am proud of it even now. I set my glass down on the nearest table. I excused myself with a steadiness that cost me everything I had, and I walked the length of the great hall with my spine straight and my face arranged, past the banners and the long tables and the trio still playing the same slow old song, and I did not let it break until I was 3 corridors away, in the dark of the servants' stair, with my back against the cold stone, and my hand pressed over my mouth so the sound wouldn't carry. Whist found me there 11 minutes later. She told me later she had counted, standing at the top of the stair deciding whether to come down. And she did not ask what had happened. She had seen enough from the edge of the hall to guess most of it. She simply sat down on the cold step beside me in her good shoes, and put her arm around my shoulders and let me shake. And after a long while, she said very quietly, "Whatever she said in there, it isn't going to be the last true thing she ever says to you," which I did not believe that night, but which I have thought about often since. I did not yet know that I was carrying something that would make nothing more the single most inaccurate thing Rhiannon Duskwood had ever said in her life. She came to my rooms the next morning before I had finished dressing, which she had never once done in 3 years, and stood in the doorway with the particular stillness she used when a decision had already cost her something and she was bracing for it to cost her more. "I want to explain," she said. "You don't owe me an explanation," I said, which was a lie, and we both knew it was a lie, and she let it stand because the alternative was worse. "Harrow has been testing the northern markers for a year," she said. "Fen believes Thornfield is the only alliance that closes the gap before summer. I did not deny you because I believe it. I denied you because the room needed to hear it. And I could not think of another way to give them what they needed without giving you up in front of everyone. And I chose wrong, and I am telling you that I chose wrong. And I do not know how to make that true in a way that helps you." "You could have said nothing," I said. "You could have let the question sit unanswered. You could have said it was none of that woman's business. You had a dozen doors out of that moment that didn't run through the word nothing." She did not argue with me. That, more than anything else she said that morning, was what told me how much it had cost her. A woman who could argue a border treaty for 6 hours without conceding a clause, standing silent in my doorway because she had no defense that would survive being spoken aloud. It was, I think, the longest sentence I ever heard her speak, that first one about Harrow and Fen. I did not thank her for it. I was 26, and I had cried alone on a servant's stair 12 hours before, and I had had all night to decide what I needed, and what I needed was not an explanation. I needed a wall. "Then we go back to the study," I said. "The letters, the calendar, nothing else. Whatever happened the night of your hand does not happen again, and whatever almost happened last night on that terrace does not get spoken of, and you do not come to my rooms in the morning like this, because I cannot survive being explained to twice. Isolde, you don't get to say my name like that anymore either," I said, and I watched that land, watched something behind her eyes flinch in a way I had never seen it flinch. Not even over the border, not even over her mother's death, which she had told me about once, flatly in a single sentence, 3 years before. She turned the ring once. She said, "Understood," which cost her. I could see it cost her. And she left. And I stood in the middle of my own small room with my heart going like something trapped, and told myself that a wall, at least, was a thing I knew how to build and hold. I went to the study an hour later and filed the previous week's correspondence in complete silence. And she worked across the desk from me in complete silence. And we did this for 3 weeks, both of us pretending that the particular quality of that silence was professional, rather than a wound with a schedule. I want to tell you what those 3 weeks were actually made of, because a wall is easy to describe in the abstract, and much harder to live inside. It was Rhiannon reaching for a letter at the exact moment I reached for the same letter, and both of us withdrawing our hands half an inch too fast. It was her asking on the 9th day whether I had slept well, and my answering with a single word, and watching her decide not to ask a second question. It was the two of us eating the midday meal at opposite ends of a table built for 12, in a dining room that had never once, in 3 years, felt as large as it felt that month. Twice I caught her watching me when she thought I was occupied with the ledgers, and twice I let her look rather than acknowledge it, because acknowledging it would have meant admitting that the wall was already developing cracks of its own, on both sides, before I had even found out what I was going to have to tell her. I did not know yet that I was already 3 weeks pregnant with proof that the wall was never going to hold on its own. I found out on a Tuesday, 11 days after the gala, in the small washroom off the kitchen, because it was the one room in the manor with a working lock that wasn't the study. I had suspected for 4 days, the particular exhaustion, the way cedar and wood smoke had started turning my stomach when it used to steady it, the fact that my body was keeping a calendar of its own that had nothing to do with the one I kept for Rhiannon. And I had bought the test in the village on my one afternoon off, wrapped in brown paper at the bottom of a basket of thread and soap, so the woman at the counter wouldn't look at me the way villages look at unmarried omegas. The line came up before I had even set it down. I want to describe what that felt like honestly, because I think it is the part of the story people understand least. It was not joy. Not yet. And it was not only fear, though the fear came fast and complete. Rhiannon's pup, the Alpha's pup, conceived the same week the council began drafting a marriage to another Alpha entirely. A fact that would not read to Elder Fen as an accident of timing, but as a deliberate move against the alliance, a threat to the border itself if it became known before the treaty was signed. I sat on the closed lid of that washroom, with the test in my 2 hands, and understood with total clarity that the truth I was holding was not safe anywhere in that house that belonged to me. I thought, absurdly, of the heather in my ledger. I thought that I had kept one small proof of something good for over a year without anyone finding it, and that perhaps I could do the same with this, if I was careful enough, for long enough, until I understood what to do with it. My own rooms were searched twice a season by the same girl who did the household linens, a kind woman with no ill intent who simply moved through every drawer I owned the way linens require. Wist's rooms were smaller and shared a wall with 2 others. There was, in the entire manor, exactly 1 room with a lock that only 2 keys opened, and I had one of them. And it was Rhiannon's study. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I would retrieve it that same night, once the house was quiet, and decide what to do with the truth once I had a single hour of privacy to think in. I wrapped the test in a handkerchief, the plain linen one, not the good one, and I carried it up the back stair with my heart going like a fist against a door, and I let myself into the study with my own key, and I put it in the one place I was certain no hand but mine or Rhiannon's would ever fall, the locked bottom drawer of her desk, beneath the ledger of border correspondence, folded inside the same handkerchief pushed all the way to the back. I meant to take it out that night. What happened next was very small, and it undid everything. The Thornfield delegation arrived early instead, 3 days ahead of schedule, a full retinue with Cressida Marrow at its head, 6 wagons and 11 attendants, and a household suddenly turned upside down preparing rooms and meals for guests. No one had expected until the following week. I was needed everywhere at once. The guest ledgers, the seating arrangements, the correspondence confirming terms that now had to be finalized faster than anyone had planned. The house did not stop moving long enough for me to be alone in that room again for a week. The first near miss came on the 4th day. Rhiannon needed the border correspondence, the same drawer, the same ledger, to answer a formal query from Cressida Marrow's own secretary regarding the exact language of the old boundary markers. And I was standing in the study when she reached for the key at her belt. My whole body went cold in a way I had never felt before. A specific, total cold. And I understood in that instant why people say fear has a taste. Because mine tasted like copper and old paper. "I'll bring it," I said, too quickly. And she paused with the key half-turned and looked at me with the particular attention she gave anything that did not match the pattern of a person she had watched for 3 years. "You've done that ledger's filing every week for 3 years without once offering to fetch it for me," she said. "What's wrong with the drawer?" I do not know to this day whether what I did next was quick thinking or simple panic wearing the coat of usefulness. I said the ledger was out of order, that I had been meaning to refile the last quarter's correspondence and hadn't finished, and that I would bring her the relevant pages within the hour rather than have her search through my mess. It was, I want you to notice, the first lie I had ever told her in 3 years of service, and it came out of me smooth as anything. And she believed it, because why would she not? I was the person who never let a ledger fall out of order, and the lie worked precisely because it was so unlike me that it did not read as a lie at all. "Within the hour," she said, and let the key go, and went back to the letter she was drafting. And I stood there for a moment with my heart still slamming and understood that I had just built the second lie of my life on top of the first one, and that the two of them together were starting to feel less like a wall and more like a debt. I brought her the 3 pages she needed within the hour, copied fresh in my own hand, and I did not open the bottom drawer, and my handkerchief stayed folded where I had left it, and I told myself, again, that I would retrieve it that night. I did not retrieve it that night either. Alpha Cressida Marrow requested a private audience with Rhiannon to discuss the treaty's final terms, and I was required in the room to take the record, and I sat at the corner of that same desk, with my own secret folded inside a drawer 4 inches from my elbow, while 2 alphas discussed, in careful diplomatic language, the precise shape of the alliance that was going to be built on top of the life growing inside me. Cressida was, I will say again, not unkind. She spoke to me directly twice, asked after the household's readiness for the coming season, and there was nothing in her manner that suggested she saw me as an obstacle rather than a fixture of the room. Toward the end of the audience, while Rhiannon read over a clause a second time, Cressida glanced at me with something that might have been simple curiosity and asked, mildly, whether I had served the house long. 3 years, I said. "Long enough to know her moods, then," Cressida said, with the faintest edge of dry humor, nodding toward Rhiannon, who did not look up from the page. "She reads a clause 3 times when she's decided not to like it, and hasn't found the words yet." It was, I understood later, an act of genuine kindness, a woman offering me a small piece of shared observation, secretary to secretary almost, as though she sensed something in the room she couldn't name, and was choosing gently not to name it. I have thought since about how much simpler this would all have been if I could have hated her. I could not. She was doing exactly what a Border Pax Alpha is supposed to do, which was try to keep her people safe, and the only thing standing between her and a clean alliance was a secret in a drawer 4 inches from my elbow that she did not know existed. I nearly lost the whole of it on the 6th day, in front of the full council, and I think about that morning more than almost any other, because it is the closest I came to the truth coming out on someone else's terms instead of mine. We were gathered in the long chamber below the study, Elder Fenn at the head of the table, Cressida Marrow and 2 of her attendants along one side, Rhiannon at the other, and myself in the corner with the record book, where I always sat, where no one ever looked twice. The room was close and overwarm, a fire built too high for the season because Fenn felt the cold in her joints now, and I had eaten almost nothing that morning because nothing would stay down. And somewhere in the second hour of border figures, the room tilted, gently, the way a floor tilts on a ship. And I understood, with a kind of distant clarity, that I was about to faint in front of the Ashgrove Council, and the entire Thornfield delegation with a folded pregnancy test sitting in the desk 2 floors above my head. I did not faint. I want that on the record too. I gripped the edge of the record book hard enough to leave a crease in the leather, and I fixed my eyes on the one steady thing in the room, which was, absurdly, helplessly, the small silver wolf crest pin at Rhiannon's collar, the one she wore to every formal council session, the one I had watched catch the light 100 times over 3 years, while I took down minutes I only half heard. I counted the points of the wolf's teeth on that pin, 1 through 9, the way you count anything to keep from going under. And by the time I reached 9, the room had steadied itself, and no one at that table appeared to have noticed anything at all, except Marta, who had been called in to consult on an unrelated matter of the household's winter stores, and who caught my eye from across the room, with an expression I did not yet have the courage to read. Afterward, alone in my own rooms, I wrapped myself in my mother's old pale green shawl, the one thing of hers besides the dress that had survived the year since her death. Soft wool gone thin at the elbows, smelling faintly, still, after all this time, of the cedar chest she'd kept it folded in, and I sat by my small window that did not face the moor, and I let myself shake for exactly 10 minutes, the way I had learned to allow myself exactly 10 minutes and no more. And then I folded the shawl away and went back to work. Cressida found me alone on the 10th day, in the corridor outside the study, where I had stepped out for a moment of air that had turned into rather longer than a moment. She did not ask if I was well, which I had come to expect and dread from everyone else in the household. She simply stood beside me at the window for a while, looking out at the same moor Rhiannon's study looked out at, and said, without any particular weight to it, "I have watched a great many secretaries in my life, Miss Farrow. Most of them do not look the way you have looked for the last 2 weeks." I did not answer. I did not trust myself to. "I am not asking you to tell me anything," Cressida said. "I am only telling you that whatever it is, I hope it resolves in a way that lets you stop looking like that. I did not come to Ashgrove to make anyone unhappy. I came because Fen believes it keeps my people safe, and because I believed it too. And I am beginning to wonder if the second part is still true." She left before I could decide how to respond, and I stood at that window for a long while after she'd gone, turning her sentence over the way Rhiannon turned her ring, and understanding for the first time that the woman I had been dreading as my replacement might, in some other version of the story, have become something closer to an ally. By the second week, I had stopped trusting my own body to keep the secret for me. The exhaustion came in waves I couldn't schedule around. Twice I had to leave the study abruptly, claiming a message to deliver, when the nausea rose too fast to manage at the desk. Whis noticed before I told her anything. She cornered me in the linen room on a rain-gray afternoon, arms crossed, refusing to let me pass with an armful of pressed shirts until I answered her. "You've gone pale in the mornings for 2 weeks," she said. "You flinch at the smell of the kitchen fire, and you keep touching your stomach when you think no one's looking," which, for the record, I have been looking. I did not lie to Whist. I could not. She had unpinned my hair before the gala with the same directness she was using now, and there was no version of our friendship that survived a lie of that size. "You can't say anything," I said. "Not to anyone. Not to Marta. Not to the girl who does the linens. If this gets to Fen before the treaty is signed, it isn't just my future that ends." Whis did not ask whose it was. She already knew. She had been standing close enough to the terrace doors the night of the gala to have her own suspicions, and my silence in that linen room confirmed them without a single word passing between us. She simply set down the shirts, took both my hands, and said, with more gravity than I had ever heard from her, "I won't say anything, but Isolde, you cannot carry this alone in a house this small forever. Someone is going to notice before you're ready, and I would rather it be me than Fen." She was right, though neither of us knew yet how soon, or how it would happen. Marta Quinlan noticed less than a week later, because Marta had been the pack physician for 30 years and had learned to read an Omega's scent the way I had learned to read Rhiannon's ring. She found me in the kitchen garden on a gray morning, ostensibly cutting herbs, actually standing very still and breathing through a wave of nausea I had been hiding for 2 weeks. And she set down her own basket and looked at me for a long moment with the particular directness of a woman who has delivered 3 generations of the same families and has run out of patience for other people's careful silences. "You've changed," she said, not a question. I did not answer, which was its own answer, and she did not push, which was its own kindness. She crouched down beside me among the chamomile, and for a while we simply worked in silence. And then she said, without looking up from the herbs, "I delivered you into this world in every sense, but the literal one, Isolde Farrow. I watched you arrive here with one case and no family. And I watched you build yourself a life out of ledgers and quiet and a friendship with that girl Whist. And I have never once seen you let anyone close enough to hurt you. Until this year. Marta." "I'm not asking whose," she said. "I already know whose. I've known since the week after the border ride, when the two of you stopped being able to be in the same room without the air changing. I'm only telling you what I tell every frightened young thing who sits in my garden with a secret too heavy to carry alone. You can hold a perimeter, Isolde. I've watched you hold it for 3 years. You cannot hold your own blood back forever, and the longer you try, the more it costs you to let it out when it finally comes. I lay awake more nights than I will admit, in that stretch of weeks, turning over the shape of the future rather than the shape of the secret. I was an Omega secretary with no family name worth mentioning, and a pup coming that would carry, whatever else happened, the blood of the Alpha of Ashgrove. I did not know what that made me in the eyes of a council that had spent a year trying to marry Rhiannon to someone with land and standing. I did not know whether a pack that had never once had to consider the question would make room for a child like mine, born outside any treaty, outside any ceremony, outside anything Elder Fenn's charter had words for. I thought more than once of simply leaving, taking Whist's help, a little coin, disappearing to the market town where my mother had raised me, raising the pup alone the way I had once imagined raising myself alone before Ashgrove took me in. I never told anyone I considered it. I am only telling you now. What kept me from it in the end was not courage. It was the heather in my ledger, and the handwriting I could pick out of 100 letters, and the particular economy of a woman's stillness that I had spent 3 years learning by heart. I did not believe yet that Rhiannon would choose me over the border, but I found I could not make myself choose to disappear before I had at least given her the chance to prove me wrong. I nearly told her that same evening, a different evening than the one I mean to tell you about now, though by then there had been several, each one a small failed rehearsal for the one that finally happened. She had come to the study for the last of the day's correspondence, and the light was going gold through the north window the way it does on the moor in late summer. And she stood close enough that I could smell the cedar and the wood smoke, and something in me rose up, ready to say the whole of it. The test, the drawer, the 4 inches of desk between us and the truth. I opened my mouth. She turned the ring once, unrelated, over some border figure she was frowning at. And the gesture stopped me cold, because I remembered, in that half second, exactly what that ring turning had cost me 11 words at a time in front of 300 people. And I could not make myself trust that this time would be different. "Was there something you wanted to say?" she asked, glancing up. And there was something almost hopeful in the question. Something that told me she had been waiting 3 weeks for exactly this moment, hoping I would be the one to break the silence first. "No," I said. "Good night, Alpha." I watched the hope go out of her face, quietly, the way a lamp goes out when the oil finally runs. I told myself there would be a better evening for it, once the Thornfield Treaty was settled and the border secure, and the pack no longer holding its breath. There was not a better evening. There was instead, the night before the signing, Elder Fenn had set the date for the Thornfield Treaty 3 weeks after the gala, timed to the full moon the old charter favored for pack alliances, and the signing itself was to take place in the study, Rhiannon's study, my study, the room with the 1 lock and 2 keys. The following morning, with witnesses from both packs present, I want to tell you what that last week felt like, because I think it matters. It felt like walking on ice you already know is cracked, testing your weight 1 careful step at a time, telling yourself that as long as you don't stop moving, the surface will hold. I filed correspondence I could barely read through the fog of exhaustion. I sat through 2 more audiences with Cressida Marrow, watching my own future be negotiated in diplomatic language across a desk with my secret still folded 4 inches from my elbow. I dreamed, twice, of the drawer opening in front of the whole assembled council, and woke both times with my heart going so hard I had to press both hands flat against my chest to steady it. Rhiannon worked late the night before the signing, alone, reviewing the final language of the contract with the border correspondence spread across the desk, and she needed, at the very end of it, a survey document from 3 years back that she remembered filing in the bottom drawer. I was not in the room when she opened it. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easier to tell you I was standing there and saw her face change. But the truth is, I was 2 floors up in my own rooms, unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling and running my hand over a stomach that had only just begun, faintly, to round, when I heard footsteps on the stair that were too fast and too heavy to be anyone but her. She did not knock. She had never, not once in 3 years, entered my rooms without knocking, and the door came open with the handkerchief, my handkerchief, the plain linen one, held flat across her open palm, and the test lying on top of it, and her face was doing something I had never seen it do in 3 years of learning every version of Rhiannon Duskwood's stillness. "Whose is this?" she said. Not a question. A demand shaped like one. I could have lied again. I understand looking back that the whole shape of the next 10 minutes turned on the fact that I did not. "Yours," I said. "Mine. Ours. I found out 11 days after the gala. I hid it in your drawer because it was the only lock in this house I trusted. And I meant to take it out again. And then Cressida's delegation came early. And then there was never an hour when the room was empty and safe. And I am sorry that you found it like this instead of hearing it from me, but I am not sorry it exists." She stood in my doorway for what felt like a very long time, turning the ring, over and over, faster than I had ever seen her turn it. And I understood that I was watching a woman do arithmetic with her whole life at once, the treaty signing in 9 hours, the border unresolved, the council's faith in her judgment, and a pup that had not existed in any version of the future she had been building since the gala. "How long have you known?" she said. "Since a week after the gala, and you said nothing." "I tried," I said, and my voice cracked on the second word, which I hated, because I had promised myself I would not cry in front of her twice in 1 month. "I stood in the study 3 nights ago with the words in my mouth, and you turned that ring over some border figure, and I lost my nerve, because the last time I trusted you with the truth about what we are to each other, you called me nothing in front of 300 people. That landed. I watched it land, watched the arithmetic behind her eyes change shape. "Do you want it?" she asked quietly, and there was something underneath the question I had never heard from her before. Not the alpha weighing a treaty, but simply a woman asking another woman something she was afraid of the answer to. "Yes," I said, and I did not hesitate over it, though I had hesitated over nearly everything else in the past 3 weeks. I was afraid of what it would cost us. I was never afraid of the pup itself, not for 1 single day. "Then that is one of us who has been certain of something this month," she said, and there was no bitterness in it, only a kind of tired honesty I had never heard from her before. And for a moment, the distance between the desk and the doorway felt smaller than it had all night. "The signing is at dawn," she said finally. "I know," I said. "Fen will not accept a delay. I know that too." She looked at the test again and then at me, and the stillness in her face broke. Not into anger, which I had braced for, but into something raw, something I had only seen once before, in the kitchen at midnight, with her hand torn open on harrow wire. "I need to think," she said, and left, and I did not sleep for the rest of that night either, certain that I had handed her an impossible choice at the worst possible hour, and that whatever she decided, it would not be me. She came to the study at dawn, before the Thornfield delegation arrived, and found me already there. I had not been able to stay away, had told myself I would at least keep the room in order for whatever came next, had straightened the same 3 pages a dozen times waiting for footsteps. "Sit down, Isolde," she said. "Not Miss Farrow, not this morning, not with the whole of it laid bare on the desk between us." And I did. And she did not sit across the desk the way an alpha addresses a secretary. She pulled the second chair around beside mine, the one no one ever sat in, and she took both my hands in both of hers, and for a long moment she simply held them, thumb resting where the ring usually turned, still, entirely still, the way she had been the night with the torn hand. I said nothing more in front of 300 people, she said, because I could not say the truth in that room without handing Fen and every ally in it a weapon to use against you before I had found a way to protect you from what saying it would cost. I told myself I was protecting you. I have had 3 weeks to sit with the fact that I was protecting the treaty and telling myself it was you. Rhiannon, let me finish, she said, gently, which from her was its own kind of touch. I sat with that drawer open for an hour last night before I came up here. I thought about Fen and the border and every argument Cressida's council will make about a broken alliance. And then I thought about the fact that I have spent 3 years watching a woman catalog a stem of heather like it was the only proof of something good she was allowed to keep. And I decided I would rather lose the border than become the kind of alpha who makes her do that twice. What are you saying? I said, though I already knew and wanted to hear her say it anyway. I am not signing the Thornfield contract this morning. I will tell Fen myself, before the delegation arrives, that Ashgrove is not for sale at the price of denying my own pup and the Omega carrying her. I do not know yet what that costs us at the border. I know what the other choice costs, and I have already paid it once in 11 words, and I will not pay it twice. I want to tell you that I said something equal to that. I did not. I put my forehead against hers, the way I had wanted to do since the moor, since the heather, since the night with the torn hand. And for a moment, neither of us said anything at all. And then she kissed me, once, careful, the way she did everything, as though the whole of the last 3 years had been leading to exactly this and nothing else. And it was the first time in 3 years that I let myself believe mine might survive being said out loud. Elder Fen did not take the news well that first morning. I will not pretend otherwise, and I will not pretend the weeks after were simple. There were council sessions I was not permitted into. Hard conversations about the border that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the pack Rhiannon was responsible for. She told me, once, briefly, that Fen had used the word reckless more than once in that first meeting, and that she had let the word stand because she did not have a better one to offer in its place. Only the plain fact of her decision. Alpha Cressida Marrow, to her enduring credit, withdrew from the proposed alliance with a grace I had not expected and have never forgotten. She asked for a single private conversation with Rhiannon before she left Ashgrove, and she asked unexpectedly that I be present for it as well, a courtesy no one had extended me in 3 weeks of negotiations that had shaped my entire future without once asking my opinion of it. I remember what I told you in the corridor, Cressida said to me before she turned to address Rhiannon directly. I am glad it resolved the way it did, even though it costs my own council a border they wanted secured. I have no interest in a marriage built on a lie the Alpha herself had already refused to keep telling. I told you as much the night of the gala, though perhaps not in so many words. Ashgrove's business is Ashgrove's, and this was never truly mine to take. Thornfield loses more than Ashgrove does in the short term, Rhiannon said. I won't pretend otherwise. Thornfield loses a treaty, Cressida said. I would have lost considerably more, marrying into a house where the Alpha had already given her whole self away and simply hadn't said so aloud yet. I would rather find my own version of what you two have than borrow the empty shape of it from someone else's refusal. She inclined her head to me then, the smallest gesture, but a deliberate one. I hope, for both your sakes, that whatever you are building is worth what it has cost. I think of that sentence often. I have never been able to decide whether it was a blessing or a warning, and I have come to believe it was simply both. Rhiannon spent the better part of 2 months personally negotiating a narrower border treaty with Harrow directly, one that cost Ashgrove land instead of a marriage, riding the boundary line herself for 6 straight weeks in weather, that would have kept a lesser Alpha indoors. Elder Fen, watching her do it, came around slowly to the idea that a pack could be kept safe by a woman with nothing left to hide, and slower still, but eventually, to the sight of me at Rhiannon's side in council meetings, no longer introduced as anyone's secretary alone. I kept the study, I kept the ledgers and the letters, and eventually a second key was cut for a second drawer, one with no lock at all, because Rhiannon said she did not intend to spend the rest of her life needing to hide anything from me again. I kept my chipped blue inkwell on the corner of the desk where it had always sat, and Rhiannon, who had never once in 3 years commented on it, mentioned one evening, almost idly, that she had noticed the crack the very first week I arrived and had liked me a little for keeping it anyway. It was, I think, the closest she ever came to telling me she had been cataloging me the whole time too. The folded dish towel from the night of the torn hand. I want to admit this now since I am admitting everything else. I had kept as well, tucked at the bottom of my own trunk since that first midnight in the kitchen. A small, ridiculous piece of linen, with a faint brown stain that would not wash out. I never told Rhiannon I had kept it until the week our daughter was born, when I finally showed it to her, and she held it for a long moment and said nothing at all, which by then I understood better than any word she could have chosen. Our daughter was born the following spring, in the same room with the north-facing window, with Marta Quinlan's steady hands and Whistcombe pacing the hallway outside, wearing a groove into the old floorboards. She has her mother's ice blue eyes, and Marta swears, the exact same stillness before she cries, the same half-second of gathering herself, that I spent 3 years learning to read in a woman I was not supposed to love. Rhiannon named her before I had fully caught my breath, a name that meant, in the old northern tongue, held ground, and I understood exactly what she meant by it, and did not argue. I wrapped our daughter, that first cold night, in my mother's pale green shawl, because it was the softest thing I owned, and because I wanted her first hours in the world to smell faintly of cedar chest and old wool, and every good thing that had survived long enough to reach her. Rhiannon sat on the edge of that bed until dawn, turning her ring, watching the two of us with an expression I had spent 3 years learning to read, and had never once seen aimed at anything but a border map, something like reverence, something like relief, something like a woman finally allowed to want a thing out loud. At the next Founding Gala, under the same chandeliers, in front of the same 300 pack members and half the Northern Territories, Rhiannon stood at the dais with our daughter in her arms and me at her side, in my mother's green dress, the small silver wolf crest pin fastened this time, not only at her own collar, but at mine as well. Her idea, not mine, offered without ceremony one morning the same way she had once offered a stem of heather, and she did not wait for anyone to ask what I was to her. She turned the ring once with her thumb. "This is Isolde Farrow," she said, her voice carrying to the very back of the hall without ever rising. "And this is our daughter, and there is nothing else in this territory I would trade for either of them." Elder Fenn, standing near the front with the new Harrow Treaty already a season old and holding, inclined her head, satisfied. Whist, somewhere near the back, was openly crying, and did not seem to mind who saw it. Marta Quinlan, closer to the dais than protocol strictly allowed, caught my eye across the hall with the particular look of a woman who had told me, in a garden full of chamomile, that I could not hold my own blood back forever, and had been right, and knew it, and was gracious enough not to say so aloud. I stood there in the candlelight, in the same hall, where a woman I loved had once denied me in 11 words, and listened to her undo every one of them in front of the same 300 people, and understood that some doors, once you finally stop bracing against them, open the whole way, and stay open, and let everything in. I thought of the girl who had arrived at Ashgrove with one case and a borrowed coat, certain that some doors simply did not open for people like her, and I wished, for a brief, absurd moment, that I could walk back through the years and tell her to keep waiting. It was going to be worth it. Every silent morning, every wall I built and rebuilt, every night I spent certain I had ruined everything. All of it had been leading, one careful step at a time, to this exact chandeliered room, this exact woman turning this exact ring, this exact daughter asleep against her mother's shoulder, while 300 witnesses watched an alpha finally say the whole truth out loud. There is nothing more I could ask this territory to give me. I already have it.